Here on Fox News, I'm going to play this for you and you can comment, KJ. The war buildup to Venezuela, I think, is a good example of this. And the CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies, funded by the U.S. government, had this to say about it.
That's not to reject the idea that it is important, and it's certainly not a defense of Venezuela. But when we're talking about marshaling American forces, American money, potentially danger to Americans, why is it important for us to change Venezuela?
Well, I think that this cuts to the heart of President Trump's agenda in Latin America. The priorities, as I see it, are threefold. First, migration. Second, drugs. And third, China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. In Venezuela, you have all three of those issues present, and all three of those issues present in a major way. I think that's why the focus has been so intently on Maduro, the opportunities that he provides for China and Russia to project power just 600 miles from the U.S. homeland, the regime's participation in drug trafficking, which kills Americans, and the 8 million Venezuelans who have left that country because of ruinous economic policies. I think this hits on all of the issues that the president cares so much about, and why.
So, I mean, KJ, a lot of the emphasis there was on the so-called power projection of China and, to a lesser extent, Russia, in CSIS's own words. This organization is funded by the biggest weapons contractors, KJ. Talk about what matters here. How does this relate to how we should be looking at this national security strategy?
Yeah, CSIS is one of the deep state think tanks. It's, kind of the heart of the deep state. It was originally founded by Henry Kissinger. And if you went to their, their website many years ago, you would see that they would, state that their objective was to maintain U.S. supremacy. They've removed that because it's kind of embarrassing. But they are a U.S. supremacist think tank. And of course, they're extremely hawkish. We can see here that this is the work of Marco Rubio in the national security strategy. You can see different portions that relate to different members of Trump's cabinet, but this is the Marco Rubio section. And of course, it is all about taking down Venezuela. It is all about, creating this pretext about narcotics, which of course is not true. Venezuela, is not a player in the field of narcotics. If there is one country in the Americas which is responsible for proliferation of narcotics, it is actually the United States. Going back to, the Air America, Myanmar, the Golden Triangle, all of that, and Iran-Contra. The U.S. has a long history of trafficking in narcotics and using them to fund its dirty wars and to do its dirty work, and now to use it as a pretext, as it has many times before in the past, as a way of waging war against a country. This is the new WMD excuse. But the other piece that's thrown in there is about migration. And once again, let's think about migration. Why is migration a threat? Well, actually, the empire and capitalist empires in general, they have a very fluid relationship with immigration. They want migrants to come in so that they can discipline and undercut the power of labor in their domestic countries. So they let that happen. And then from time to time, they kick them out. And they use this as a kind of a valve that they open and close on various occasions in order to discipline and control the labor market. It's a very, very deliberate thing. And also at the same time, they're using immigrants as a scapegoat for the failures of capitalism. The kind of contradictions and immiseration that we're seeing all across the United States and in Europe have to do with the failures of capitalism itself. And the Trump administration wants to blame immigrants. They are the most convenient scapegoat, and literally like a scapegoat, you chase them out of the city walls and you slaughter them. That is the idea. So this is just more of the same. It's the logic of capital and the projection of the need to disown the failures of capital that are being projected onto immigrants as scapegoats. And not to mention the fact that many of the immigrants in Europe, for example, are refugees from U.S. imperial wars. And so all of this kind of ugly, dirty, mess is simply being victim blamed back onto the people who have suffered most from capitalism. And then we're also throwing in China. Certainly they do not want Venezuela to be part of the Belt and Road, which has been salutary for all Latin American countries and certainly for most of the global South. They want to make sure that the Belt and Road does not get any traction, but certainly not in the US's backyard, which the US considers to be, its colonial territory. It will not tolerate that. And so it wants to undercut Venezuela. It also has to do with the fact of controlling fossil fuels as they relate to the petrodollar. Trump has made it very clear he wants to ensure the continuity and the strength of the dollar as the US global currency, as the US global reserve currency. And he wants to make sure that any challenges to that in terms of, alternate fossil fuel tracks and the support and the relationship between Venezuela's oil and Russia's oil and China's energy needs are severed and damaged to the greatest extent possible. So hence we see this massive escalation against Venezuela and this kind of consolidation, this kind of fortress consolidation of power inside the Western Hemisphere, despite the fact that the US still considers the entire Pacific to be its strategic defensive perimeter.
Yeah, Carl, the contradiction is absolutely out of this world when it comes to wanting to, quote unquote, stop migration and yet also wanting to very openly to conduct regime change in Venezuela, which already with the sanctions has caused a pretty big migration crisis. A war would definitely worsen that. But maybe you can talk about, too, the relationship with China and, to an extent, Russia that keeps on coming up when it comes to this war on Venezuela. It seems like the Monroe Doctrine for the Trump administration now is really a doctrine to prevent Russia and China from doing any business in Latin America, in the region. Your thoughts?
Well, the first Monroe Doctrine was to reserve the Americas, the West Hemisphere, for United States, to keep the European powers out. What I did agree with KJ is there's a heavy domestic component of the U.S. foreign policy. Like this whole regime change, Venezuela is Marco Rubio's baby. And Marco Rubio has always been a hardcore anti-communist, and he's an establishment neocon. He is a neocon. He's not reconstructed or reformed. He's just a traditional establishment neocon. And now he's been put in charge of U.S. foreign policy. And Marco Rubio himself also has, presidential aspiration. He ran for president before, and it's very likely he will try to run again, in 2028. In a way, he's building his portfolio right now. This is his chance to build his legacy, build his portfolio for his future presidential run. And yes, there's contradiction about wanting to stop migration, yet wage war on Venezuela, but that's all immaterial to presidential ambition of Marco Rubio. For him, the important part is to overthrow left-wing governments in Latin America. And as for Russia and China, in many ways, it's just an excuse for U.S. to go in there and carry out its aggression against Venezuela, because Chinese involvement in Venezuela is mostly economic. China is the largest importer of Venezuelan oil exports. Now, this is a case where U.S. do want to be able to monopolize oil resources of Venezuela. Venezuela being has the world's largest reserve of oil, but Venezuela produce a particular type of oil, the heavy crude oil with high sulfur content. Now, traditionally, the American refineries in the southern rim of United States, particularly around the Gulf of Mexico, they are built to take those heavy crude and process them into petrochemical products. So Venezuelan oil is perfect for that. This is why even during this heightened tension, Trump still gave a waiver to Chevron to continue to ship oil from Venezuela to refineries in southern United States to process. What U.S. what U.S. is doing currently. They after the shale quote unquote revolution, when they start fracking, they produce a lot of oil, but they produce the light sweet oil with very low sulfur content, and those are not suited for the existing refinery in southern United States. So what U.S. do is they actually export those light sweet oil, and they import Venezuelan heavy crude for process in its own refinery. So when China moves in and start to take a large chunk of Venezuelan oil export, for United States, that's viewed as, okay, you are taking this black gold from our neighborhood, from our backyard. So this is the economic argument, but largely this is really just an excuse, for this very naked resource grab in Latin America. This is not just about Venezuela. This is going to affect the whole Caribbean. Venezuela, Trinidad, all the Caribbean basin will be affected because they also share oil and gas resources in the Caribbean. So as much as Venezuela has strong relationship with China and Russia, for the U.S. imperialists, this is just provide the perfect excuse, because another thing China is done is it's investing in Venezuela's aging oil infrastructure. But traditionally, before the Bolivarian Revolution, Venezuela depended on foreign oil company, particularly American big oil, to come in and to help service their oil infrastructure. Now, China, so Venezuela for a long time, they're exporting crude oil, but they have to import petrochemical products because they didn't possess their own refinery to process their own crude. So they're acting as like the like a typical third world country commodity producer. They're exporting raw commodities and receiving manufactured goods. What China is helping Venezuela to do right now is trying to build up refinery inside Venezuela, so the crude doesn't have to leave Venezuela, but to be processed into petrochemical products that Venezuelans will need. And this is eating into the cake of American big oil. And big oil is one of the biggest backers of Trump. This is another reason Trump is saying, screw alternative energy. We're just going to go 100% to hydrocarbon, drill, baby, drill, because he knows who is his base. His base is big oil. That Trump's administration is throwing their lot 100% with the big oil. So this is about oil. This is about resources. This is also about keeping China and Russia out. I think it's more like a bonus, but it's more an excuse for them to carry out this aggression.
Yeah, what do you think, KJ? Because there is even prominent neocon warmongers who never really oppose war, who are very concerned about this potential, what is likely to be at least some kind of U.S. intervention, deeper war on Venezuela. What do you think what Carl said, and why is there concerns about this, despite the fact that there's alignment, as we saw with CSIS, on some of these major points?
Yeah, well, before I get to that, I agree with Carl that you can see the workings of the capitalist elites. And certainly big oil has had a strong hand in this. And the other elites that you can see have done their lobbying for this document are the tech bro elite, the tech bro carpetbaggers who want to profit from war. And they want their digital Wolfowitz doctrine. So we're talking about Eric Schmidt, Palantir, all of these, AI tech bros. They want to control the internet. They want to make sure that the national security strategy reflects their intention to control the internet and the entire global information sphere for themselves. And that, again, is explicitly written into the national security strategy. So the digital Wolfowitz doctrine is clearly resurging here. But the other question that you ask regarding, why are the neocons concerned about war with Venezuela? There are different factions of the neocon elite, and some of them they're pulling in different directions. They are uncertain. I mean, what they do know is that U.S. is in serious trouble. It cannot maintain a protracted war anywhere. It certainly cannot maintain a protracted war with Russia, certainly cannot maintain a protracted war with China over Taiwan Island. Recent estimates have shown that if they went to war, they would run out of missiles in about 1 week. And they still want the United States to focus on China. They're afraid that if it gets distracted in yet another unwinnable war in Venezuela, and Venezuela is an immense country that has both mountains and jungles. The US never does well in mountain warfare or in jungle warfare, as you can tell from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and Vietnam. And so they're concerned that this is going to be yet another quagmire that the US will sink into. And they want a rapid pivot to war with China. But of course, that is even more unreasonable. It just speaks to the kind of irrationality. It's one kind of irrationality versus another. But you have the neocons that are hot about a war with Russia. You have the neocons that want immediate pivot to war with China. This is the CSIS crew that are still very, very influential. And then you have others that are, concerned about their own particular interests. So competing factions inside the ruling imperial elite are starting to come to grips with the fact that the US is not capable of waging 2-front, 3-front, 4-front war with superpowers, and yet they still want it all. They're still incapable of coming fully to grips with reality. As the neocons said, Karl Rove is the purported author of this, is that we are an empire now. We create our own reality. The rest of you can just suck it up and study it. There's still neocons that subscribe to that belief.
Carl, can you comment on this notion that we've heard so many contradictions? You made the point that fear-mongering about Russia and China is a lot about just justifying U.S. interventionism as exactly as you laid out earlier about the Monroe Doctrine, justifying bigger U.S. presence, a more devastating U.S. war assault on Venezuela. But then there's also those who have said that Russia and China have abandoned Venezuela, when, from my estimation, my assessment, Venezuela would have a really difficult time if it were all by itself without any economic and military partnership with China and Russia. What do you say to this in terms of these narratives that we hear, and comment on what KJ said about the difficulties of this potential war for the U.S.?
Well, first of all, China is sustaining the Venezuelan economy now, being the largest buyer of Venezuelan oil export. So people keep in mind that is a real material support, very real material support that keeping Venezuelan economy afloat. And one of the angle for U.S. plan for Venezuela has always been regime change. This is the logic of sanction. They sanction a country to trigger economic collapse, and the United States has been trying to do this to Venezuela for decades now, ever since Hugo Chavez came to power. And Chinese buying Venezuelan oil is sustaining the Venezuelan economy in the face of stringent U.S. sanction. And, a lot of people are expecting, China and Russia to, go harder, go aggressive, to fight a World War III with the United States. That's just not realistic, right? I mean, for anything, China and Russia, they want to calm the waters. They don't want to trigger a World War III. And so I don't know. Like, I think there are too much expectations from the people who feel hopeless, especially people who live in the imperial core, who are themselves hopeless to change the foreign policy of their own countries. So they kind of, project their hopes and dreams onto others like China and Russia, and then they get disappointed when China and Russia don't do what they want China and Russia to do. That's just very naive way of looking at the geopolitics. And I don't pay too much attention to those criticisms. Venezuela, they do have Russian military hardware. At this particular juncture, even if China and Russia were to rush more military equipment to Venezuela, it would not be timely enough, because then you will need to train people, personnel to be able to familiarize with weapons. Those trainings will take years. This is, both China and Russia have made very clear statement that they oppose unilateral U.S. actions, U.S. aggression toward Venezuela. And so far, it's not exactly clear that U.S. is signing on for a boots on the ground invasion. Actually, I don't think that's in the cards. I think U.S. is still playing up the theater of intimidation, trying to force a change domestically inside Venezuela. I call this doing regime change on the cheap. They have always tried this, by the way. They have sponsored coup. They have tried to sponsor opposition figures like Juan Guaido in the past, and now Machado. And they're trying to apply maximum pressure, hoping the Venezuelan society will crack internally. And then, they may be causing a civil war. This is like the Libyan model. So they might even go as far as launching a couple bombing runs, like what they did in Libya, to cause panic and then to support opposition to overthrow the Venezuelan government. In this case, there's limited thing that China and Russia could do. If U.S. was just doing this show of intimidation in hope of Venezuelan society to crack, it's really up to the Venezuelan government. So far the solidarity of Venezuelan people have held up. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the immediate future.
Yeah. Your thoughts, KJ, before we move on this, with anything Carl said, and same question to you.
I agree with Carl. Time is on the side of the multipolar world. U.S. is facing a serious crisis of capitalism, but more than that, it has come to the understanding that industrial capacity matters. It's certainly in the case of industrial war, such as in the Ukraine-Russia war, industrial capacity matters, and especially in the matter of rare earth elements. Rare earth elements are critical for military prowess, and after China restricted rare earth elements, they understood that it does not have, or it really has difficulties reindustrializing, and it really will have difficulties building up rare earth element processing capacities. China has built this up over a 50-year period, and the US is not going to do that in 5 years, let alone 2 or 3. It has already de-skilled its workforce, and it has already deindustrialized. And its ruling elite can only think in profit maximizing short-term rentier extractive terms. And so the US is facing a serious crisis or a dilemma, and time is on the side of the global South. So the Chinese, what they want to do is they want to avoid getting into a kinetic war. They understand that it's simply a matter of continuing to do what they are doing, continuing to build out their alliances, build out the economic alliances of the global South through the Belt and Road and through BRICS. And they do not want what the US wants, which is a quick and dirty gambit that pulls them into a kinetic war that weakens both the state that they're trying to undermine, in this case, Venezuela, and China itself. So I don't think that's going to happen. But what is going to happen is China is going to continue to give economic support, certainly political support. And if the US is foolish enough to get into a war with Venezuela with boots on the ground, which I agree with Carl, seems unlikely. But if they actually put boots on the ground, it is going to be Iraq and Vietnam all over again, something that ostensibly they say in this national security strategy that they don't want, but that will be like that, but certainly much, much worse, because we have seen that the US counterinsurgency strategy does not work, certainly didn't work over 2 decades in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we're seeing that with the development of electronic warfare jamming capacities, which are now becoming normalized for even small wars, it is going to be a much, much harder haul than the US has had before. It will not have the kind of open, capacity to bomb, poor, impoverished peasants at will. It will find that it is being resisted on multiple fronts, and that the electronic spectrum is contested in all domains. And they will find that they have a much, much harder fight than they have ever had, certainly much harder than Afghanistan, certainly much harder than they had in Vietnam, which were both drubbings, serious losses for the US.
Yeah. I mean, the talk about contradictions, the idea that the U.S. would do a Vietnam or Iraq-style intervention at the same time that it releases a so-called strategy that claims to want to do the exact opposite. And I maybe, Carl, I'm wrong, but I'm old enough to remember the Bush administration and then even Obama after. But the Bush administration had a really difficult time and at the same time had a lot more effective, in my opinion, politicians, elites. Obama had very effective elites around him and himself to get through this. I'm not so confident that's where some of my cautious optimism is. Similar to Iran, I'm not so confident that the Trump administration has that level of stability and that level of legitimacy to pull something like this off. But I could be wrong. I don't know. What do you think, Carl?
Well, I mean, you have to remember Bush, that was 25 years ago. And that's like 25 years of deindustrialization years ago. I mean, it has been 2 decades. Since then, it has been 2 additional decades of deindustrialization in the United States. Right now, U.S. are losing aircrafts in South China Sea before China even fired a shot. They have some serious issues. The U.S. the whole lack of human capital, lack of investment in the domestic infrastructure is already now impacting the U.S. military-industrial complex. The Navy, they couldn't find enough people to staff their ship. They couldn't build their ships fast enough. So United States have facing serious resource constraint and very serious structural problems. So this is why I'm long-term optimistic, because the U.S. decline will continue. I mean, it is a big problem for countries like Venezuela to face right now. But I think as long as Venezuela can have its social cohesion, hold together long enough, they can wait U.S. out.